and then feel free.
Okay. All right. We are starting our presentation by Dr. Derek Polischuk. Thank you so much for being here today. Dr. Polischuk is the professor of piano and director of piano at piano pedagogy at Michigan State University. He is an enthusiastic supporter of the education of musicians at every age, ability, and background. He has been a clinician at many conferences around the world and serves on many committees and boards, including the National Conference on Keyboard Pedagogy's Committee for Teaching Students with Special Needs, the advisory board of the Orange County School of the Arts Pianist Program, the board of directors of the San Diego Musical Merit Foundation, and he is the president of the Michigan Music Teachers Association. Derek is a founder and director of the Celebrating the Spectrum Piano Festival for advanced pianists on the autism spectrum. His book, Transformational Piano Teaching, has been hailed as a landmark in the field of piano pedagogy. He has been the recipient of the Curricular Service Learning and Civic Engagement Award, the MSU College of Music Excellence and Diversity Award, and the Teacher Scholar Award given in recognition of exceptional skill in teaching. We are incredibly fortunate to have Dr. Polischuk speaking for us today. Thank you so much for joining and sharing your important expertise.
Thank you so much, Julia, for the invitation. And thanks to all of the CAMTA members for being here today. I just wanted to correct one quick thing about my bio. The president of MMTA is indeed here, but it's Norton Marshall. So my bio is old and I need to update that. I'm the immediate past president, a far less important job. So anyway, thanks everybody. So again, I'm Derek Polischuk from Michigan State, and I'm grateful for this invitation. Today's presentation, I'm calling The Sound of Understanding, Transformational Piano Teaching on the Autism Spectrum. And my goal today is to give you a practical and humane framework for teaching students with autism, one that draws from the principles in my book that I'll talk about a little bit later on, Transformational Piano Teaching, as well as our ongoing work in a program that we have at Michigan State in the summers called Celebrating the Spectrum, which, as Julia mentioned, is a program for pianists with autism spectrum disorders, kind of a summer music camp opportunity for them, summer festival kind of opportunity for them. I think that this is an area where I've heard many teachers feel that they lack training. And I hope what I share today will offer clarity, as well as encouragement and concrete strategies that you can use immediately with students who are neurodiverse. Here's what we're going to go today, where we're going to go today in the presentation. I'll begin with a quick look at something that I have started to call a transformational piano teaching framework. Then I'll introduce autism through a piano pedagogy lens, not a medical lens. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a real doctor like that. I'm a piano doctor, so I'm not going to speak to you from that perspective, but a practical one that I think we can all relate to as piano teachers. I'll also share 3 case vignettes from our program that illustrate different cognitive and sensory profiles of students that you might encounter. And then I'll move into some specific teaching strategies, including structure of lessons, communication, image-based teaching, and sensory-safe musicianship. And then we'll close by looking at what it means to build a neurodiversity-affirming piano studio. And then finally, I'll save a little time for some questions at the end. In my book, with the title Transformational Piano Teaching, I describe transformational piano teaching as teaching the whole person, not just the pianist. I think that this kind of teaching is a teaching that values beauty and connection and meaning. And, in your work with young people, I think you'll realize that this is something that people in particular are craving at this moment. This kind of teaching is responsive rather than rigid. And what I've learned over the years is that when you teach students with autism, this kind of framework becomes even more important. Working with students on the spectrum doesn't require us to be different teachers. It requires us to be more of the teacher that we already aspire to be. And the kind of teacher that I aspire to be is a teacher that is attentive, that is receptive, and more aware of my students' interior world. One of the most important concepts for piano teachers that I've come across is something called narrow beam attention. So, narrow beam attention is a cognitive style in which attention behaves like a very focused flashlight beam. Once the beam is pointed at something, it stays there. So, it's deep, sustained, and highly stable until the task is complete, or until you give it a very clear and respectful transition. Now, the good news is that many students with autism have this attentional style. They have narrow beam attention. And this can make sequencing, analysis, and practice for students with autism incredibly powerful. It also means that the teacher must structure the lesson so that transitions are predictable and that tasks are chosen very intentionally. The next thing I want to talk about is sensory processing. Some students with autism are sensory seeking, which means they pursue strong tactile or auditory input. This might appear as very heavy piano playing, big physical gestures when they play, or gravitating toward very strong sounds in music. Rather than viewing this as a piano teacher as too loud or too much, it helps to see this as something called a regulatory strategy. So the pedagogical opportunity here is very profound. We can guide these kinds of students toward the refinement of their sound. We can explore with them how sound moves, how it resonates in space, and how touch affects color. So for many students like this, who have this kind of sensory seeking view of how they approach music, tone production becomes a bridge between sensory regulation and expressive control on the piano. You may also see something in students with autism called stimming. Stimming is tapping on something or rocking back and forth or humming, sometimes outright singing, or sometimes pacing. All of these things are also self-regulatory behaviors. They help a student with autism manage their sensory input, manage their emotional load, or their cognitive effort. Stimming is not misbehavior, and it's not something that needs to be stopped in people with autism. Instead, stimming to the piano teacher is information. If you would observe an increase in stimming in one of your students, that's a cue that the student may need a movement break, a chance to get up and walk around, a slightly slower pace to instruction, or clearer structure. Not all students with autism communicate verbally in the way we might expect in a lesson. Some students communicate primarily through posture or gaze, the way that they look at you or the surrounding place around you, gesture, or the way that they breathe. Verbal language is not the same thing as musical intelligence. Some of the most musically insightful responses I've seen have come from students who speak very little. The teaching strategy with students like this is to establish predictable routines, nonverbal modeling, and let musical dialogue lead you. When verbal instruction is limited, musical call and response becomes incredibly powerful. Or other things that might fall into this category are two piano playing, improvising on two pianos, um, uh, anything that is musical and communicative can be very helpful with students who struggle with verbal communication. I'd like to introduce you to a student named Gavi. Gavi is a student with autism who has a remarkable ability to find musical connections, quotations, motives, or patterns across repertoire and composers. He might be playing a Bach prelude and suddenly tell me where the same contour shows up in a piece by Debussy. The other day, he was working on a Pishna exercise, and he had written in his score, in very neat text, he wrote, in quotations, "Do you think I'm sexy? Rod Stewart, 1979." And the melodic contour of that song was the exact same as this Pishna exercise. And so this is just an extreme example of these kind of awesome connections that Gavi makes between pieces of music. This is not a distraction. It's the way that Gavi creates a cognitive map of music across genres, across repertoire, and it's fascinating. So we use that in his lessons as a strength. We explore form, we explore how to memorize a piece, and we explore expression through the connections that he discovers. So he might write into a score something a little more mainstream than what I just used, an allusion to a Beethoven symphony in his Shostakovich Piano Concerto Number 2, and so we'll go find the score to that, and I'll have him explain to me why that's a connection. So his learning pathway is built not on standard sequencing, but on recognizing these amazing threads through the repertoire. I'm going to try to play this video. I hope there's sound sharing from this video. I forget about how this works, but I'll try. Just give me a thumbs up if you can hear. No, sorry. Sorry, I forget how to do that. It's a short clip of him playing a very beautiful Chopin nocturne. But he's got a YouTube channel and he records lots of music that he learns on the piano as well as on the organ. He's a terrific organist as well.
If you want to try again, when you go out of share screen and then you come back share screen, there is a button where you write share sound. And when you click on this, then we can hear it. But you would have to go out of the share screen.
Oh, I see. You know what? I don't think it's worth it.
Okay, good.
It's a nice. Oh, sorry.
Okay.
Sorry. Another student with autism that has come to our festival is someone who arrived with a strong sensory need for physical contact with the instrument. He really craved a huge sound, a very, very firm touch, and wide movements when he played. So rather than trying to calm his sound right from the beginning, we tried to explore it with him. We talked about how sound feels to him in his fingers, how it releases out of his fingers, how it releases out of the piano, and how different touches can shape resonance. And he hadn't really explored different ways to touch the piano in order to get different kinds of sounds. Over time, this student developed a refined palette of color with weight and motion. The work began with sensory regulation. He loved just how playing a big sound on the piano made him feel, but it grew into something that was much more nuanced and expressive. The last case study I wanted to share is students that have very limited spoken language. There are some people with autism that have tremendous gifts at something like the piano, but have very little ability to communicate kind of in a what we would consider an intelligent verbal way. So most of our communication happens through small shifts in posture the way that they change their body language, or whether they're making eye contact with you or not, or the way that they're breathing, if their breathing is relaxed or their breathing is quite stressful. We developed with this student a consistent opening ritual in our work with them, greeting them the same way each morning, having the same physical setup on the stage every day, and the same kind of musical exercises that we do, having students play and then having comments on those performances. With this student, it was interesting. Image-based metaphors became very essential. Describing the sound as liquid or lifting or opening really worked with one of these students. The fewer words that I used, the more responsive he became. Over time, our musical dialogue became rich and expressive, even with almost no spoken language. I want to spend the next few sections giving you concrete teaching strategies for working with students with autism. We'll look at things like structure and communication, imagery, sensory safe musicianship, technical development, and how to interpret behavior as communication. Structure in your work with a student with autism is your most powerful tool. Create a repeatable lesson arc. Welcome them in the same way each time. Warm up in the same way each time. Use focused skills, exploration, and a closure to the lesson that is predictable and on time and organized. Consider using a visual or written lesson map, or at the very least, a lesson notebook. Use predictable transitions between activities to help students with autism shift smoothly from one task to another. In communication, in teaching a student with autism, I find that less verbal communication is more. Model something for them first on the piano. Use a simple gesture with your hand, pointing to your right hand or something like that, to highlight what you want them to focus on. Then allow them to have time to process what you just did. Wait longer than feels natural. Affirm their progress descriptively rather than evaluatively. Describe in specifics what you like about what they've improved in their sound. Sometimes the most effective teaching is simply giving a student with autism the space to absorb what you're exploring together. One of the most surprising things to me that I've learned about working with people with autism over many years is that they tend to respond extremely well to artistic imagery. This goes kind of counter to the way that people with autism are taught usually, but I just find it to be a fault in the way that people with autism are currently taught in places like public schools. These students might seem extremely analytical or extremely literal, but image-based teaching can unblock extraordinarily musical insights from these students. Describing sound as moving or lifting or unfolding or shimmering typically has worked very well for me with students like this. I like to use visual metaphors for phrasing and form with these students. And I think maybe what happens is that this kind of teaching engages both sensory and conceptual pathways for people with autism simultaneously. It's important to have a sensory-friendly environment that provides support for focus and comfort for people with autism. I'm sure you've seen these kind of rooms in public spaces or museums or things like that. I find just making some simple adjustments to my space helps me out. I tend to keep my lighting kind of dim. I think that kind of helps out a little bit. simplify the visual field. I don't have a lot of clutter around here, and kind of keep it a little cleaner. One of the first students with autism that I ever taught, he came into my studio at MSU, and the first thing he said to me was, "Wow, it really smells like salmon in here." And I was like, "Yeah, I was just eating leftover salmon for lunch. Thanks." So, those little kind of things, like, they really kind of matter. They can be, sometimes distractions. Um, be aware of the volume that you use with your voice. Not being too surprisingly loud tends to help. And help the student find a physical, comfortable relationship with the instrument. I think that's super duper important for all of us, but particularly important for people with autism. I think that, one of the principles that I believe in playing the piano is that tone production should feel good in your body. It should feel nice to play the piano. I had a teacher once say that playing the piano should feel like kneading bread. It should feel good in that way. And I just believe in that. So a student with autism should feel safe to experiment with color in their sound as well as the feel of playing the piano. I find that for technique, prioritizing balance, contact with the keyboard, and comfortable movement rather than precision is a much better approach first. Using whole body movement to support rhythm and pulse. For reading, I like to reduce visual clutter on a score. There might be some neurotypical students that really love for me to mark lots of things in their score, and I find that students with autism find some of those things a little bit overwhelming, so I keep it simple. Sometimes students might have a comorbidity of a visual impairment, and so be wary of that. Maybe sometimes large notation can help. Shorter musical excerpts on a single page and gradual visual complexity can help the student succeed without overwhelming them. Everything that an autistic student does is communication. Everything that they do. The way that they greet you, the look on their face, it's all communication. Movement, withdrawal, or insistence or avoidance, all of these communicate something from a student with autism. Sometimes they communicate the following: sensory overload, curiosity, confusion, or a need for something to feel a little bit more predictable. So when you interpret an autistic student's behavior as communication rather than misbehavior, your teaching can become, in some ways, more gentle and a little bit more effective. Some of the most amazing people I've ever met in my whole life are parents of the students with autism that I've had the privilege to work with over the years. They're superheroes. They just are so dedicated to the well-being of their child. It's really inspiring. So I think, as in all good piano teaching, but especially students with autism, a parent partnership is essential. Short weekly check-ins are ideal. I text Gabby's parents every week at the conclusion of his lesson just to give them a feeling of how I thought he did and how he's practicing, and they use that at home. What their sensory load was like that week, what routines went well for them, and what challenges came up. All of these things can be super helpful for you as a teacher. Parents oftentimes have insights about their students that will help you pace lessons more effectively. This is something I've been kind of thinking about more just the past couple of years, and I'll kind of explain why in a moment. But I think that, one of the most powerful things that we can do, I'm preaching the choir when I say this, but, is to create communities where people are very different from one another. and communities where we can get together and get along and work together. And I think that building something that you might describe as a neurodiversity affirming studio that is sensory aware, predictable, and flexible is something that can be really powerful. And the reason I've been thinking about this is I'll talk a bit about celebrating the spectrum in a moment, but one of the things that we do at Celebrating the Spectrum is that we hire a bunch of our graduate students in pedagogy and in performance to serve as mentors during the week, and they really get to know the neurodiverse students. And so something that I started doing this past fall is the neurodiverse students who have come to Celebrating the Spectrum who live within driving distance, they come and have their lessons on the day of my studio class at MSU, and then they come to studio class. And it's just awesome because, a lot of the DMA students that work at the Celebrating the Spectrum, they already know these students, they have a relationship, and they are kind of co-equal partners artistically. And I just think it's beautiful. So you might want to have recitals that include maybe video participation from some of your students if they are totally overwhelmed by performing in public, or more sensory-friendly formats for your recitals. Consider the fact that evaluation of students with autism oftentimes should be strength-based rather than deficit-based. And above all, a neurodiversity affirming studio communicates to the student that they belong here and that your way of engaging with music is valid. I'd like to just close with this thought. Teaching students with autism deepens our capacity to teach with clarity, imagination, and humanity. So I think that it makes us better teachers, not only for students on the spectrum, but for every student we encounter. So thank you very much for investing your time in this. It really matters. Before we have a little Q&A, I wanted to show a video. Oh, I'm going to need the sound thing to be fixed on this. So you were saying earlier that I should stop sharing. Is that right?
Yes, stop
Okay.
sharing, go out, and then you come back and click on sound sharing.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Sure.
So this is a short video about celebrating the spectrum at MSU. This is kind of an old video at this point. This is from the first year, 2016, but I think that it does a nice job of telling the story of how our week is formatted, and maybe it'll spark some questions that you have about today's presentation. Just give me a thumbs up if you hear the sound. I don't know what I was anticipating.
I was actually against it.
Yeah, I had a lot of apprehension, A whole week, really a whole week?
I am not coming all the way to Michigan.
When we first got here, all of a sudden I just knew it was okay. It was just the right thing.
I thought immediately of traditional teaching. Your traditional piano teaching cannot be taught to any of the kids that are here.
Great. Very good. Very good. The goal that I have for them and for their parents is that doors of possibility are opened. I was anticipating something extraordinary because having worked with students with ASD, I know that they are capable of extraordinary things when they're put into exciting circumstances.
I was quite nervous. I've never been to a piano camp.
I was worried about logistical things. I was worried about how are we going to recruit students. I was worried about do we have enough meal tickets for lunch, that sort of stuff. But I wasn't worried about these students' ability. I have seen their ability before in my work, and so I was excited about that part.
The professors teach us piano in ways that I've never been taught before.
You want it to sound lonely. You make me a lonely sound.
It's been really great.
Beautiful.
The whole celebrating the spectrum idea is just showing that there's so many wonderful things that can happen with kids on the spectrum. They play the piano with tremendous emotion, and they're very excited about what they're doing. And you know, that's a very exciting thing for us to work with, and it's also a very exciting thing, I think, to show other people.
Basic day is 8 a.m. breakfast. Students then get on the bus right before 9 o'clock for a master class on their solo repertoire.
And then they have a Pilates class from 11 to 11:45.
Go over to Brody Cafeteria again at noon. At 1 o'clock we have a college-style lecture. From 2 to 4, the students are paired up with their mentors and are working on four-hand piano repertoire.
And then 2 hours of practice from 4 to 6.
And then at 6 o'clock we have dinner at Brody again. From 7 to about 8 o'clock we have a fun campus activity.
I like the master classes, and then I also like coming to the dairy store.
Gives them a sense of what the university is like and what it's like to be in this kind of an environment.
It's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of fun.
And it's going to, I think, make a great recital.
I do hope that I can do my best and not break down the stage.
We have a big range of levels of playing, which is terrific.
I am really happy with everybody's progress, but I think most importantly, I'm happy that people are having a good time and are engaged and feeling the dynamic of the festival.
The impact on the students is very positive.
Sometimes when a person gets a diagnosis, they kind of get put in a lane. The spectrum of different interests and abilities of a person with autism is every bit as wide as a person without autism. And oftentimes they're locked out of things like performing arts, for example. And it's such a rich part of life. This really does give us the opportunity to really recognize, appreciate, and even celebrate how much a person is.
Excellent job. You're welcome.
There's this really famous music festival in the summers in Aspen, Colorado, and this is sort of the center of the classical music universe in many ways in the summers. And I want this to become the Aspen for Asperger's. I want this to be something that all students with autism spectrum disorders know about and want to come to.
I think it's just such a wonderful thing. It makes us shine the way we should shine.
I want them to come here because it's inspiring. I want them to come here because it's fun. I want to expand this to many other instruments and to make this something that people with autism strive for and want to be at and want to be transformed at. We're gonna need a lot more pianos. Yeah.
Finally, I just wanted to put up a picture of, I wrote a book a couple years ago about this kind of teaching, and the list of chapters or the list of topics is on the right side. So it's not just about neurodiversity, but it's also about the specific needs of working with students who might be considered gifted, the specific needs of working with adult pianists, working with recreational pianists, students with depression, the differences between, if you do any college teaching, between working with undergraduates and graduate students, the specific needs of international students, and then just thinking of your studio as a diverse set of just very different people with very different needs and ways for you to think deeply about, hopefully to think deeply about being receptive and open to what the needs of those students are. So I'd be happy to take your questions if you have any. I'm happy to do things like discussing specific situations that you might have with neurodiverse students in your studio or details about that, and I'll offer any kind of insights that I can. Yeah, Julia.
First of all, thank you so much. This is really excellently laid out, clearly laid out for all of us. I learned a lot. I have one very specific question, and it's, do you have like a checklist or any kind of techniques for when you're interviewing potential students like how can you determine at the interview process what kind of learner they are, maybe if you're able to take them, and how do you work through that interview process? I'd be interested in hearing what you have to say on that.
Yeah, that's a terrific question. There's I mean, I don't have like a thing that I do every time, but there's a couple things that I have found to be pretty helpful. One of them is just allowing the student to play a lot for me and to play like many different styles, hopefully, just to hear, you know, what they're passionate about and to kind of hear what they're, you know, what they do in different styles. And then I like to try to work immediately on sound. And that's, you know, that's something that I'll probably do in any first lesson with any student, actually. I'm sure a lot of you do that too, but I find that there can be a little bit more kind of rigidity in terms of the kind of sound production approach to the piano that a student with autism might have. And it can just be a chance to test like, okay, what is possible here? Not just what is possible, but what is the right approach to getting them to hear their sound and produce their sound in a new way. So just some kind of sound exercise, you know, could be 10 minutes of some kind of sound exercise from the repertoire they just played. I also like to improvise a little bit with them. So I'll just kind of give them a very simple framework, like, you know, we're going to do a little kind of jazzy thing in like D Dorian, white key D, and tell them, you know, play some melodies that you hear from this. And what that tends to kind of get at for me is a couple things. One thing is their ability to kind of imitate, you know, so I'll play a little lick and I'll be like, you know, answer me with what you hear, and they'll play something back. So that can be kind of a helpful thing. And then finally, just talking to their parents about what their background is. You know, there's oftentimes like fascinating stories about how they found out that these kids are good at the piano. Sometimes it's like, oh, we heard them in the basement on a keyboard, and suddenly like we heard this Beethoven piece that we knew. You know, it's just, you know, so those are just kind of interesting and inspiring peeks into what it means to a student and to a family. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, Margaret?
I have a student that has some Asperger's diagnosis, and I find he really likes to talk a lot before about his life, and I didn't know if that is more specific to some Asperger's or if he will talk for about 15 minutes if I let him. And often I do, because I just think maybe he just needs to be heard. Or what is your suggestion?
Does he talk about certain topics each time?
His personal life.
His personal life? Okay, cool. Well, there's a couple of things that you can think about. So one thing that there's something called, I forget what it's called. Oh yeah, I remember what it's called. There's a model for working with people with high functioning autism in public schools called the Wings Mentor Program. And what the Wings Mentor Program is it matches up a neurotypical person with a neurodiverse person, like, you know, buddies, like fourth grade buddies. And then what they do is that it's a chance for the neurodiverse person to kind of geek out on their obsession with their neurotypical friend. So they tell them all about how much they know about airplanes or something like that. And so it's kind of like a release valve for that can be really helpful. And then they also teach like some communication, like, oh, now listen to your friends, the things that your friend is passionate about. And then at the end of this, there's like this fair that they have at the end of a semester where all the neurodiverse and neurotypical students like develop these like poster board things to talk about their obsessions. So what they do in this is that there's kind of an agreement where like your chance to talk about that thing that you love to talk about is with your buddy and at the fair. And you're going to get a real chance to shine with that stuff at those events. So during class, we have to focus on math. And it's just like a really good, like, you know, kind of attention framing exercise, I think, in a way. So You know, what I do with some of my students that have these kind of obsessions is I give them outlets for it. So like Gavi, Gavi will come to his lesson with like 50 quotations in his score from things that he found from, Shostakovich Symphony number 7, second movement, like all of this stuff, and I give him a chance at the beginning of every lesson to show me 5 of those things, and we take about 5 minutes doing this thing that just means so much to him. And then we move on. And we just have an agreement of we're going to do it every week. I'm going to listen to what you have to say about this every week. I'm going to engage with you very enthusiastically over those 5 minutes. But now we got to move on to the rest of the lesson.
Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds good. Thank you.
Welcome. That's a really common question.
Would you say they're more prone to do that sort of thing or not?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, like people with different neurodiversities sometimes, do these deep dives into topics and just are really geeked out about. I mean, I find myself doing that. Like, if there's something, I mean, I don't know how many times you've like stopped something you're watching on Netflix to like read the whole Wikipedia article about whatever they're talking about. And then you just have to like I have to tell my wife, like, you're not going to believe this, that kind of thing. That's, I think, a lot of times what neurodiversity is for a lot of people. So.
Thank you.
There's a question in the chat.
Oh, sure.
Elena, do you think every teacher can teach autism students? Are there personalities or characteristics that will enhance the teacher's ability to teach these students?
That's a great question. I would say absolutely yes. Anybody can teach students with autism. I think the best characteristic that somebody can have is flexibility and openness.
Empathy.
And yeah, I think somebody just said empathy, that's great too. I mean, just understanding that you have a student who is passionate about piano and wants to explore it with you. Not trying to fit them into a certain box. I think that that's good. And I don't think that rigid piano teaching in any way is good for any student, but for students with autism, it's particularly ineffective. So if you're someone who's flexible and who's open and who's willing to try different things and just sort of explore, then I think you're somebody who can teach students with autism very well. Yeah, Elaine?
Could you talk more about your summer program? Because I might have somebody for you. I don't know.
Fantastic. Yeah. Yeah, so we invite usually 6 or so pianists with autism between the ages of, we started this out and we wanted this to be pre-college, but it was kind of harder to find students that would be willing to come to this that I thought. So anyway, our ages have ranged from 13 to 30. It's students who are a little bit more advanced pianists. So the students are playing core piano repertoire as their solo piece. So the students come and they study a solo work with us through the week, as well as they learn a forehand piece that they perform with a DMA or master student from MSU. And that person kind of works with them all during the week. It's a 1-week opportunity that culminates in 2 performances. The first performance is a house concert that we have in town for donors and family members that is just kind of a comfortable living room concert with a dinner. And then the next night we have next afternoon we have a public recital. And that's really what it is. And the students stay in the dorms at MSU. We have transportation for them on a special bus that takes them places on campus. And we also, for students who are selected, we also provide a full scholarship as well as travel for both them and one caregiver. And so if you have a student who you think might qualify for this, please absolutely send me an email. My email is POL. Maybe I'll put this in the chat. My email So my email's in the chat. If you have a student you think might qualify.
No, I didn't go in chat. Go to chat.
Please send me a note. And our application process is very informal. I just ask for a couple of videos of the student playing and sometimes call them up for a short chat on the phone.
So a parent could go with the child?
That's right. Yeah, we do cover the travel costs of one parent or caregiver and the student. Absolutely.
Well, I don't know if this student would be, I mean, I used to teach a student, and now she's studying with somebody who really teaches people who are autistic.
Okay.
But I started the little girl. And what you said about parents, it never would have happened without this mother, because the little girl put her hands on top of her mother's hands, and that's how she learned how to play.
It's
She
lovely.
used to sit on her lap, and we did that for like a whole year. And she really could play, tiny little jazz pieces by the end of the year. And so
Well, I'd love to
then
be in touch with this person if you think that would be possible.
I'll give them a call. Yeah, because
Great.
then they moved, and then they kept coming, but then I had them go to a professional person who teaches that. Okay, great.
Great.
Derek, that was great. It was really great.
Thanks a lot, Elaine. I think I saw another
I have
hand.
a question.
Sure.
I'm wondering how you got started in this. I have taught some students who are on the spectrum, and the first one I had, the mother came with papers, and this is, be very specific, and these are some of the issues that he has, and everything went great. And I also read books by some people like Temple Grandin and some other people who are on the spectrum who's written books. And I'm wondering if there were books that you read how you got started in this, and what was useful information for you as you started learning about this.
Thank you. Yeah. So I got started in it basically probably the same way that anyone else here got started in teaching students like this, and that's completely by accident. When I first started teaching at MSU in 2006, my undergraduate piano pedagogy class, they taught a beginning keyboard class at our community music school as their kind of lab program. And there was a young man in the class who seemed really excited. He was a 7-year-old boy, seemed really, really excited about playing. He seemed a little quirky, but I mean, nothing too out of the ordinary. And so he had the class, he was smiling every time, at the end of it, he was just super excited about it. Then his mom asked to meet with me, and she said, my son Khalil has autism, and I would love it if you could just continue teaching him. And I said, well, I don't really have time, but it was before I had kids, so I thought, whatever, sure, I'll work with Khalil. And actually what I did was I watched a lot of YouTube stuff about just pianists with autism. So like if you there's a couple big figures in this. So there's a professor in the UK named Adam Ockleford. And Adam Ockleford has taught a bunch of students with autism who are kind of like savants and, these genius pianists who can play anything. And I loved watching, he has videos of him working with these pianists. I just loved it, mostly because I was listening to these pianists. And I'm like, man, this is so good. This is so exciting to listen to somebody replicate something at first hearing, or improvise on something that they've never heard before. It's so cool. It's so interesting. Just as a piano nerd, I thought it was cool. So I watched a lot of those. That also led me to kind of, there are also videos about a young man in California named Rex Lewis Clack. And this is another kind of savant kind of pianist. And he was on, all these like CBS This Morning kind of shows because, with these kind of heartwarming stories about his piano playing. I just watched a lot of stuff like that. I tried to get in contact with those people. I contacted Rex Lewis Clack's mom, and I said, I'm so inspired by, these videos I found of Rex. Can you tell me more about him? She absolutely. She called me, we had a 3-hour phone call about Rex's journey at the piano, just because she loves to share this stuff. Rex ended up coming to our festival many years later. And, so I think just kind of being open to that kind of stuff. I have read Temple Grandin's books are fantastic. There's also a book called Neurotribes. I think the author's last name is Silberman. Just kind of general books about people with autism in society. And I think, it just helped me frame autism as not a deficit, like as autism is just simply a different way of looking at the world. And we all look at the world differently. We all perceive it very differently. And that just helps me as a teacher understand that every single one of my students is coming into my studio perceiving the moment differently than the last one. And that's just really like such a reminder to me. When I first, sorry to keep rambling, but when I first started teaching at MSU, I was so confused why none of my students practiced. I'm talking about like music education majors on piano, like just, what did you work on this week? Like, I didn't practice. And I didn't understand that, they didn't think it was important. I didn't understand that they didn't understand that learning something on the piano can be deeply satisfying. And I didn't really care. I was just like, why didn't they practice? This is such a bummer. So it's just one of those things that I tried to explore from every avenue, tried to engage with people with autism, tried to kind of offer my, what I can do in music to people with autism and to kind of come alongside them in their journey. Yeah, Julie?
I'm suspecting that a lot of their learning of their pieces is sort of, they have very good ears and they are, is orally based. How do you find the reading skills, or for any tips on teaching reading for them?
Yeah.
Or learning note names? Or...
Well, I mean, so first of all, I wouldn't say all people with autism are not like learn music in a certain way, because they really don't. I mean, there are many students with autism that I've taught who are only reading based, who are very rigid about changing anything in the score, and are very inflexible when it comes to just sort of exploring things by rote or improvising or things like that. So you have to kind of know whether a student can read or not. You have to kind of find that out with your work with a student. But I think when it comes to reading generally, if as much as the reading can be associated with sound, so if you're kind of doing a hybrid like rote plus reading approach with a student, I just find that that's a much better way in helping them very early on understand kind of the fact that music notation is just like a conceptual visual map of how sound goes. I mean, that's something I try to do with any student, because a good reader, I think, approaches reading music like that versus as some kind of like hard to decipher language. So I try to make it approachable. That's, I think, what you want to do with reading with a student with autism and what you want to do with reading with a neurotypical student.
Sir.
I think I saw another hand, maybe. Lori.
Yay, pick me. Okay, a couple of really quick comments. One is that this is not too much to Derek, but to everybody else. When I read his book, maybe it's a couple years ago at least, each of those chapters, all of a sudden, while I was reading everything and everything was making a lot of sense, all of a sudden I was coming up with this chapter relates to this student of mine. This chapter relates to this student of mine. So it was very practical use for me. And Derek probably might remember me saying this to him. my graduate work is also in gifted education, and his chapter on gifted education hit the nail on the head with exactly what you should be doing with gifted kids and neurodivergent students. The second thing is, Derek, you're collaborating with other well-known people and doing a presentation in March at our conference in Chicago. So if everyone wants to do and learn more and talk with you personally, it's Sunday at 2:15, because I know all my people where they're supposed to be. So really great. And I was really excited to see that collaboration.
Yeah.
Looks like it's going to be great.
I'm really excited about the whole conference, and knowing that Lori's involved in the organization of it is going to really make it cook. So I'm excited about that. But yeah, we're doing a Q&A with other people who work with special needs students. There's a bunch of people that we work with closely nationally. I think the biggest figure, the most well-known, most important figure in terms of what he does is Scott Price at University of South Carolina, has just a really groundbreaking program. So anytime that you see him speaking at a conference, he just does these really great practical presentations about working with people with autism that are fantastic. So.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you very much. Any last second questions? Oh, thank you, Cynthia.
Let's see. Am I audible now?
Yeah.
Okay. I work with a neurodivergent child. He's 7 years old. He's very bright, good musical instincts, and but there's something that he does, and it just drives me. And every time he walks into the studio, he strides in like he owns it. And I find myself emotionally freezing, where normally when I would meet him in the hallway as he's walking in, I can be friendly, but then when he just comes in like, this is my territory. So I know it's me that needs to adjust, but can you give me some helpful mantra?
Yeah. Sounds very familiar to a current student I work with now. And, it's kind of like I said earlier, with students with autism, their behavior and their nonverbal cues are their communication. It's all of our communication, actually. Oftentimes people are given the advice to stride into a space that, in a business setting or some kind of important meeting, like they own it. And in a lot of society, that's seen as a sign of strength and power and knowing that you belong. I would wonder if maybe a student like this was maybe picked up that information at some point. Picked up the information of like, when you go into any space that is not your home, act like you own it. It's a sign of confidence. For the rest of us, we can kind of like, if I read that bit of advice in a book or something, I think to myself, I kind of roll my eyes and I think to myself, I'm not going to go striding around to spaces like I own it. That is the most annoying thing ever. But with a student with autism, sometimes they read those things and they don't have the kind of filtering executive function to like take it or leave it. Sometimes they read that and they just think to themselves, that's how I have to operate in the world. I'm guessing, I'm kind of reading into their head. But, I like to, with students who I'll give you a case study from the festival. So we have a student who's a very fine young pianist. He's a 18-year-old boy, and he carries around with him a little Princess Peach doll from Super Mario Brothers. And every hour, Princess Peach has to announce that it's the hour. So in the middle of class, he'll hold up his Princess Peach and say, it's 3 p.m. And, on one hand, I think to myself, I'm glad that you're keeping track of the time. I bet you're never late. That's good. But on the other hand, I also think to myself, I'm going to sensitively tell him, in most settings, we don't announce the time every hour. And this might be one of the settings that you don't need to announce the time every hour anymore. So if there's a sensitive way that you can talk to him about, the fact that, certain ways that you walk or certain ways that you act in the world really exhibit something. They really tell people, they give people a message, they communicate. Because I bet he's trying to communicate something.
Okay, thanks. Thank you so much, Derek. I think that's all the time we have today. I imagine you left your email, so I imagine some folks may reach out to you with more questions, but do please use his email if you have any students interested in his summer program. Thank you. This has been absolute fantastic. So lucky.
Great.
Thanks, Julia. Thanks, everybody. Happy holidays. Bye.
Fabulous. Wow. That's one of the best talks I've ever heard.
Really good.
It's
Really
really,
good.
because it's for every student, not just, was his first point. Just, thank you, Julia.
Yeah.
My
Good
pleasure.
job, Julia. The presentations are great. Oh, and he was really something.
Yeah. Well, I had a student who used to walk this one girl used to walk around when I was talking to the mother. She would just take off in the living